Well, yeah, I think that it is achievable, but it would take a lot of commitment. And it would take, I think it's critical for governments to be not only in sync with its population on making this achievable, but I think it also would take the work of, in many cases, the work of think tanks, which is one of the reasons why we're at this meeting to talk about that, and working collectively with think tanks, I think, to make that possible. One of the things that I think that we haven't seen before, and I think meetings like this is critical to achieving this, is to have a collaborative atmosphere among the think tanks so that they're working together. Because when you have this kind of silo mentality where they're each working on their own thing without regard to what the others are doing, it makes achieving this goal so much more difficult. Well, I think it's perhaps no more of an exciting time to be involved in doing business with Africa, particularly if you're looking at Africa from whether it's the United States or Europe, Latin America, et cetera, because there's a lot happening in Africa. And I've been fortunate to travel around the continent quite a bit in the last 5-6 months. And I can see the dynamism, the energy here, and there's a lot that I think the rest of the world can learn and Africa can offer. So that's one thing. And in order, I think, for African leaders to take full advantage of that, I think they must be open they must be open, one, to opening their economies, and to taking advantage of some of the opportunities that are out there coming in from the other parts around the Atlantic Basin. I think part of the problem is that there isn't the outreach to the outside world so that they are aware of what's happening in Africa has not been particularly effective, and maybe whether it's the African Union or maybe countries themselves need to be more engaged in selling Africa. I mean, I'm from Miami, and in Miami we look south a lot to Latin America and the Caribbean. One country that has done a tremendous job selling themselves is the island of Jamaica, and it helps that they have some really good athletes who do a great job of selling. But beyond that, the Jamaican music, the Jamaican food, the Jamaican culture, despite the problems that Jamaica has had, when you think of Jamaica, you think of all these other great things. I mean, President Obama was in Jamaica. He went and visited the Marley Museum and those kinds of things. I think that's really important, and maybe African countries can learn a thing or two from what other countries have done successfully in selling themselves to, whether it's the U.S. Because unfortunately, when people think in the U.S. of Africa, they're not thinking about the economic miracles that we're seeing in different parts of the continent, the tremendous growth rates that we're seeing. Sadly, we're still thinking of Ebola, and we're still thinking of famine, even though there are worse famines in other parts of the world. And we're still thinking of civil wars, even though we're seeing a reduction in civil wars on the continent. Well, I think think tanks have a tremendous role to play. And I think this meeting that we're having here is really critical because, one, think tanks are getting to know each other. And two, the more that you have think tanks talking, the more you have people realizing, and again, when I talk about people, not just the think tank members themselves, you have governments and you have the public realizing that not only are there think tanks around, but think tanks do play an important role in what happens and the extension or of knowledge, exchange of knowledge in countries. Certainly they can do more, and I think it's also very important in areas where where governments are not as open as possible to make it possible for think tanks to be able to do their work, because in some cases we have some governments being particularly restrictive. But if you get past that, I think that the governments and public should open themselves up to the work that think tanks are doing, because at their most effective, and if you give them an opportunity to really do their job, there's a lot that can be learned from think tanks, and I think that meetings like this one are really important to get others thinking and seeing the huge potential of think tanks in helping to lead to whether it's ultimately further economic growth on the continent, and as well as leading to helping to lead to good governance, which is really important on this continent. Gosh, there are so many issues, but just one issue. I think maybe it's image. I think that there's a lot happening. I know we've been talking to people here about, you have a major international conference coming up here in Morocco, COP22, and that's huge. And I think that the more people know about Africa, and the more people see Africa not as a burden to the world, but more as a great opportunity and a great contributor to the world, I think the better Africa would be. And I think that's maybe one thing that Africa needs to work on, helping to get the world see its huge, huge potential.